The purring of steam, the gleam of brass, and the promise of speed. Few images capture the imagination quite like the Flying Scotsman. Born in Doncaster, works in 1923 to Sir Nigel Gresley's innovative design. This sleek 462 Pacific locomotive quickly became the flagship of the newly formed London and North Eastern Railway, often abbreviated as LNER. Its very name evoked the grandeur of the famous non-stop express service that ran between London and Edinburgh, a route that had long symbolized the pinnacle of British rail travel. From the moment it rolled out of the works in its striking apple-green livery, the Flying Scotsman was destined for legend, a world-famous engine that has been hailed as a standard-bearer of British engineering excellence and modernity. Even long after the era of regular steam trains faded into history, it has been called the world's most famous steam locomotive, a title it holds with pride to this day. This remarkable machine, with its powerful three-cylinder setup and elegant lines, not only revolutionized long-distance travel but also captured the hearts of generations, becoming a symbol of human ingenuity, perseverance, and the romantic allure of the railways. Its story is one of triumphs and trials, of speed records shattered and financial woes overcome, of global adventures and meticulous restorations that have kept it steaming into the 21st century. To truly understand the story of the Flying Scotsman, we must journey back to the wake of the First World War, a time when Britain's railways were desperately seeking a bold new identity amid the scars of conflict and the push toward reconstruction. The war had ravaged the nation's infrastructure. Tracks were worn from the relentless haulage of troops and munitions. Locomotives were pushed to their limits with substandard coal, and the entire system cried out for modernization. In 1921, the Railways Act was passed, leading to the grouping of over 120 smaller railway companies into the Big Four in 1923, the London, Midland, and Scottish Railway, the Great Western Railway, the Southern Railway, and the London and North Eastern Railway. This amalgamation was intended to streamline operations, reduce duplication, and foster innovation in an industry that had become fragmented and inefficient. Out of this merger emerged the London and North Eastern Railway, a vast network stretching from the bustling streets of London northward along the east coast to the rugged highlands of Scotland, incorporating historic lines like the Great Northern Railway, the North Eastern Railway, and the North British Railway. This new company, under the leadership of figures like William Whitelaw as chairman, needed a potent symbol to embody its ambitions, something that could showcase British engineering prowess and restore the glamour of rail travel in a post-war world hungry for progress and luxury. Enter Sir Nigel Gresley, the brilliant chief mechanical engineer of the LNER, a man whose name would become synonymous with some of the most iconic locomotives in history. Born in 1876 in Edinburgh, Gresley was educated at Marlborough College and apprenticed at Crewe Works under the legendary John Aspinall. He rose through the ranks at the Great Northern Railway, where he honed his skills in locomotive design, drawing inspiration from international developments. Gresley was particularly influenced by American Pacific locomotives, known for their stability and power on long hauls, as well as French and German innovations in compounding and superheating. He envisioned a new class of express engine that could handle the demanding gradients and distances of the East Coast Main Line, pulling heavy passenger trains at sustained high speeds without the need for frequent stops. The result was the Aoni Pacific class, a series of locomotives with a 4/6-2 wheel arrangement. 4 leading wheels on a bogie for smooth navigation through curves, 6 coupled driving wheels for traction and power, and 2 trailing wheels to support a large firebox. This configuration, often called the Pacific type after its origins in New Zealand and popularity in the United States, offered an ideal balance for express work. The Flying Scotsman, initially numbered 1,472 under the Great Northern Railway system, was the very first of this groundbreaking class to emerge from the Doncaster Works in South Yorkshire. Construction began in July of 1922 as part of Engine Order No. 297, an order for 10 such locomotives originally placed by the Great Northern Railway before the grouping. Doncaster Works, established in 1853 by the Great Northern Railway, was a sprawling industrial complex employing thousands of skilled workers, boilermakers, fitters, riveters, and machinists, who toiled in vast sheds filled with the clang of hammers, the roar of forges, and the hiss of steam. The works had a proud history of producing high-quality locomotives, and the building of the Flying Scotsman was no exception. Every component was crafted with precision. The frames were cut from massive steel plates, the boiler was assembled from hundreds of riveted sheets, and the cylinders were cast and machined to exact tolerances. The total cost came to a modest £7,944, equivalent to around £500,000 in today's money when adjusted for inflation, reflecting the efficiency of mass production techniques emerging in the interwar period. The locomotive entered revenue service on the 24th of February, 1923, just weeks after the official formation of the LNER. It was initially painted in the Great Northern Railway's apple green livery with black and white lining, a color scheme that would become iconic. By February of 1924, it had been officially christened Flying Scotsman. In honor of the prestigious daily express train service, it would often haul between King's Cross Station in London and Waverley Station in Edinburgh. This naming was deliberate and evocative. The Flying Scotsman service itself dated back to 1862, when it was introduced as a 10-hour journey with stops, but in the 1920s, it was rebranded as a symbol of luxury and speed, complete with Pullman cars, dining facilities, and attentive stewards. The locomotive's name captured the public's imagination, conjuring images of swift, non-stop dashes across the British countryside, bridging the industrial South with the romantic North. Almost from the outset, the Flying Scotsman became the LNER's ultimate poster child, a shining emblem of what the railway could achieve in an era of aviation's rise and road transport's encroachment. It represented the company at the Grand British Empire exhibition held in Wembley, London, in 1924 and 1925. This massive event, attended by over 27 million visitors, celebrated the vast expanse of the British Empire, with pavilions displaying everything from Australian wool to Indian spices, Canadian timber to African minerals. Amid this global showcase, the Flying Scotsman stood proudly on a specially constructed track, its brass fittings polished to a dazzling shine, drawing admirers who climbed aboard to inspect the cab and tender. Children gazed in awe, engineers discussed its merits, and dignitaries posed for photographs. One particularly poignant anecdote from the exhibition involves a young boy named Alan Pegler, who visited with his family and was mesmerized by the locomotive's grandeur. Decades later, as a successful businessman, Pegler would rescue the engine from scrap, fulfilling a childhood dream and ensuring its survival. The publicity extended far beyond the exhibition grounds. The Flying Scotsman featured prominently in LNER marketing campaigns, appearing on posters that adorned station walls across the network, in glossy magazines like the Railway Magazine and the Illustrated London News, and even in one of Britain's earliest talking films, appropriately titled The Flying Scotsman, released in 1929. In this silent-turn talkie adventure directed by Castleton Knight, the locomotive played itself in thrilling sequences involving a runaway train and heroic interventions, blending romance, drama, and the raw power of steam. The LNER's marketing team, led by figures like William Teasdale, proudly billed the service as the most famous train in the world, and the locomotive as its undisputed star performer. Brochures described the journey in glowing terms. Travel in comfort and style, with meals served at your seat, as the Flying Scotsman whisks you northward at unprecedented speeds. This era marked the height of railway glamour, with the locomotive embodying the optimism of the Roaring Twenties, a time when technology promised to shrink distances and connect people like never before. Beneath that striking apple green paint lay some of the most cutting-edge steam engineering of the era. The Flying Scotsman was a Pacific-type locomotive, with its 4/6 two-wheel arrangement providing the perfect balance of speed, stability, and power. It measured 70 feet in length, 13 feet in height, and weighed 96.25 long tons, or approximately 97.79 tons. The driving wheels, at 6 feet 8 inches in diameter, were optimized for high-speed running, while the axle load of 20 tons ensured it could traverse the East Coast Main Line's bridges and viaducts without issue. Power came from a 3-cylinder boiler system, 2 cylinders positioned outside the frames for easy access, and one inside for balanced force distribution, a design that promised both raw power and smooth acceleration over long distances, reducing the destructive hammering effect on the tracks that plagued older 2-cylinder engines. The boiler, with a grate area of 41.25 square feet and a heating surface of 2,552 square feet, operated at an initial pressure of 180 pounds per square inch, generating a tractive effort of 29,835 pounds force. This allowed it to pull trains of up to 500 tons at speeds exceeding 70 miles per hour. Gresley and his team incorporated advanced features like a superheater to dry the steam for greater efficiency, Walschaerts valve gear for precise timing, and a large firebox capable of burning high-quality coal at a rate that sustained performance. The tender, initially a non-corridor type holding 8 tons of coal and 5,000 gallons of water, was later upgraded. One of the most ingenious innovations came in 1928, the corridor tender. This unique addition extended the coal bunker to hold an extra long ton of coal, bringing the total to 9 tons, and included a narrow passageway running along the side, allowing the crew to change over without the train ever needing to stop. Imagine the scene: the driver and fireman, covered in soot and sweat, crawling through this confined tunnel-like space, while the locomotive thunders along at 60 miles per hour or more, handing off duties to a fresh team who had been resting in the leading coach. This corridor, measuring just 18 inches wide, was a marvel of practical engineering, complete with handrails and lighting, and it eliminated the need for crew relief stops on marathon runs. This upgrade made possible the Flying Scotsman's legendary 8-hour non-stop dash to Scotland, a feat that captured headlines and public fascination. On the 1st of May, 1928, the locomotive hauled the inaugural non-stop run from London's King's Cross to Edinburgh, covering 392 miles in just 8 hours and 3 minutes, an average speed of 49 miles per hour, with peaks much higher. Water was replenished on the move by scooping it from trackside troughs, long channels of water laid between the rails, at speeds up to 85 miles per hour. This required precise coordination. The fireman would lower a scoop from the tender into the trough, capturing thousands of gallons in seconds amid a spray of water that often drenched the cab. The journey was a triumph, with passengers enjoying breakfast, lunch, and afternoon tea in opulent dining cars, oblivious to the heroics up front. It was a British first, slashing travel times by hours and setting a new standard for rail efficiency. Newspapers lauded it as a miracle of modern engineering, and the LNR capitalized on the publicity, producing postcards and souvenirs featuring the locomotive in full flight. Through the 1930s, the Flying Scotsman's reputation soared to new heights, becoming an enduring icon of speed, style, and engineering prowess. This was the decade of Art Deco glamour, economic recovery, and fierce competition among the Big Four railways, each vying for passengers with faster services and luxurious amenities. The LNER, under Gresley's guidance, pushed the boundaries, and the Flying Scotsman was at the forefront. It achieved one of its most celebrated milestones on the 30th of November, 1934, when driver William Sparshett and fireman R. Webster took her to 100 miles per hour on a special test run between Leeds and London. This was the first officially authenticated 100 miles per hour run by any steam locomotive in the world, though rumors persisted of earlier unofficial feats by the Great Western Railway's City of Truro in 1904. The achievement, recorded with dynamometer cars and witnesses, earned Sparshett and Webster the moniker the fastest men on rails, and the press exploded with stories of the daring descent down Stoke Bank, where the engine reached its peak. The LNER authenticated the record, using it to boost morale and sales in the face of Depression-era challenges. Publicity stunts followed in abundance, turning the locomotive into a media sensation. At speed trials, cameras rolled as racing pigeons were released to compete against the train's velocity. Speedboats raced it along parallel rivers or canals, and even airplanes were pitted against it in cleverly staged events designed to highlight its prowess. One memorable stunt involved a race with an autogyro, an early helicopter-like aircraft, over the countryside, with crowds cheering as the steam engine pulled ahead. Newsreels from Path and Gaumont captured the drama, screening it in cinemas nationwide. While director Alfred Hitchcock referenced the route in his 1935 thriller, The 39 Steps, where the protagonist flees aboard a similar express, evading spies amid the clatter of wheels. Abroad, the LNER advertised the service aggressively in North America, luring tourists with promises of British elegance and speed. Brochures depicted the locomotive steaming through misty moors, with captions like, "Cross the Atlantic, then fly to Scotland on the rails." By the late 1930s, the Flying Scotsman legend had become truly international, with postcards, model kits, and souvenirs featuring the engine finding their way into homes around the globe. Technically, the locomotive continued to evolve during this vibrant period. In 1928, it was upgraded from the Aoni class to the A3 class, receiving a higher pressure 225 pounds per square inch boiler, improved piston valves, and a distinctive long banjo dome on the boiler for better steam flow and reduced priming. These changes boosted its tractive effort to 32,910 pounds force and improved fuel efficiency, allowing it to handle even heavier loads on tighter schedules. The corridor tender was replaced briefly with a streamlined non-corridor version in 1936 for aerodynamic testing, but the original was reinstated for practicality. Anecdotes from drivers and firemen of the era paint a vivid picture of life on the footplate. One driver, Bill Sparshat himself, described the engine as a living creature, responsive to every touch, eager to surge forward like a thoroughbred racehorse at the starting gate. Firemen spoke of the intense heat in the cab, shoveling coal at a rate of up to 3 tons per hour on long runs. Their faces blackened by soot, but their spirits lifted by the thrill of the journey and the camaraderie of the crew. Passengers, meanwhile, wrote glowing letters to the LNER, praising the smooth ride and comparing it to gliding on air, with vibrations minimized by the 3-cylinder design. But as the shadows of another world war loomed over Europe, change was inevitable. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 brought austerity, rationing, and hardship to the railways, transforming them from symbols of leisure to vital arteries of the war effort. Like all LNER express engines, the Flying Scotsman was repainted in wartime black in 1943 to serve as camouflage against enemy air raids from the Luftwaffe. Its once vibrant green livery was covered in matte black, and headlamps were dimmed or blacked out to avoid detection during nighttime operations. The locomotive was drafted into less glamorous duties, hauling troop trains filled with soldiers bound for embarkation ports, evacuating children from bomb-threatened cities like London and Hull, and transporting essential freight such as munitions, food supplies, and coal. The crews worked tirelessly under blackout conditions, navigating tracks damaged by bombs, dealing with air raid, warnings that forced unscheduled stops, and facing the constant threat of strafing or bombing. Fuel rationing meant using lower-quality coal, which produced more ash and clinker, clogging the firebox and reducing performance, but the engine's robust design allowed it to soldier on, logging thousands of miles in support of the war effort. One poignant anecdote from this period involves a night run during the Blitz. The driver recalled spotting the glow of London burning in the distance, the fires from German incendiaries lighting the sky, while the Flying Scotsman pressed northward with a load of evacuees, their faces pressed to the windows in a mix of fear and wonder. Despite the hardships, the locomotive maintained a semblance of its prestige, occasionally pulling special trains for dignitaries or royalty. By the war's end in 1945, Britain's railways were exhausted, with deferred maintenance and overuse taking a toll. Nationalization followed in 1948 under the British Transport Commission, bringing all lines under the umbrella of British Railways. The Flying Scotsman emerged in the new British Railways green livery, with a brief experimental stint in express passenger blue from 1949 to 1952, a striking ultramarine shade intended to modernize the fleet's image. It was renumbered as British Railways number 60,103, part of the Eastern Region's express pool. In the late 1950s, further modifications were made to keep the aging engine competitive. Smoke deflectors, large curved plates on either side of the smoke box, often called elephant ears, were added in 1961 to direct exhaust smoke away from the driver's line of sight, improving safety at high speeds. An experimental double-chimney cowlchap exhaust system, designed by French engineer André Chapelon and adapted by Alan Kalela, was fitted in 1958, enhancing draft and boiler efficiency, but initially causing issues with smoke drift until the deflectors were installed. Allocated to various engine sheds like Leicester Central from 1950 to 1953 for runs to Manchester, Sheffield, and London Marylebone, then Grantham in 1953, and back to King's Cross Top Shed in 1954, it continued on East Coast Main Line duties, pulling trains like the Capitals Limited and the Elizabethan. But the 1950s marked the inexorable decline of steam. Britain's railways, under the modernization plan of 1955, began investing heavily in diesel and electric locomotives, which promised lower maintenance costs, greater reliability, and faster turnaround times. Steam was viewed as outdated, dirty, and inefficient in the post-war push for a cleaner, more modern Britain. By 1962, there were only 8,800 steam locomotives left on Britain's network, a sharp drop from 18,600 in 1953, and the complete phase-out of steam was scheduled by 1968. In this climate of rapid change and dieselization, the Flying Scotsman's future grew increasingly uncertain. It remained in passenger service through 1962, its whistle echoing over familiar routes. But by 1963, it was earmarked for withdrawal and scrap, destined for the breaker's yard like hundreds of its contemporaries. The locomotive's twilight on the main line came on the 14th of January, 1963. That day, driver Jack Pexton and fireman D. R.H. Wood hauled the Flying Scotsman on what would prove to be its final British Railways service, the 1:15 afternoon departure from King's Cross to Leeds, though it was detached at Doncaster after pulling the train part way. Tens of thousands of onlookers lined the platforms, bridges, embankments, and fields along the route, waving, handkerchiefs, cheering, and even shedding tears as the steam icon thundered past one last time, its black livery streaked with grime from years of hard service. By retirement, it had traveled over 2 million miles, a staggering distance equivalent to circling the Earth 83 times or journeying to the moon and back 4 times. A testament to its endurance, the skill of its builders, and the dedication of its crews. Railway enthusiasts were distraught at the prospect of losing such a legend forever. Petitions circulated, letters flooded into newspapers like The Times and The Guardian, and societies like the Railway Correspondence and Travel Society lobbied for preservation. In a twist that could only belong in a storybook, the very day after that poignant last trip, the Flying Scotsman was rescued from the scrapyard by a wealthy railway enthusiast named Alan Pegler. Pegler, born in 1920 and the son of a successful businessman, had first encountered the locomotive as a boy at the 1924 British Empire exhibition, where it left an indelible impression on his young mind. Now a director of a valve manufacturing company and a passionate rail fan, Pegler negotiated a groundbreaking deal with British Railways. He would pay £3,000 for the locomotive, equivalent to about £70,000 today, and fund a full overhaul in exchange for the unprecedented right to operate it on main lines for excursion trains. This was a first for private preservation in Britain, setting a precedent that would inspire the heritage railway movement. With the backing of Prime Minister Harold Wilson, who saw it as a boost to national morale, Pegler had the engine restored at Doncaster Works to its original LNER glory, renumbered 4472, repainted in apple green with cream and black lining, the smoke deflectors and double chimney removed for authenticity, and reunited with a corridor tender sourced from a scrapped sister locomotive. The restoration was meticulous, involving the replacement of worn parts like piston rings and bearings, and the engine steamed again in 1963. On the 40th anniversary of that first non-stop run, the 1st of May 1968, the Flying Scotsman once again steamed triumphantly from London to Edinburgh without stopping, recreating the historic journey to the delight of crowds who lined the route, many waving Union Jacks. Pegler's vision extended far beyond mere nostalgia. He wanted to showcase Britain's finest locomotive to the world and promote British exports. In 1969, he embarked on an ambitious tour of the United States and Canada, shipping the engine across the Atlantic aboard the Queen Elizabeth ocean liner and then pulling special excursion trains from coast to coast. Modified with an American-style cowcatcher, headlamp, and bell to comply with local safety regulations, the Flying Scotsman chugged through diverse landscapes. From the bustling streets of Boston to the vast prairies of the Midwest, the rugged Rockies, and the iconic skyline of San Francisco, it drew massive crowds, with Americans marveling at this piece of British history. Schoolchildren climbed aboard. Veterans shared stories of wartime trains, and rail fans photographed every angle. However, the adventure strained Pegler's finances. The first year was a success, covering 15,400 miles and carrying thousands of passengers. But the second year in 1970 incurred heavy losses due to anti-steam laws in some states, high insurance costs, and logistical challenges. The engine was temporarily stranded in San Francisco, and Pegler even worked as an entertainer on cruise ships to raise funds. Undeterred, he later shipped it to Australia for a rail exhibition in 1972. But the accumulating debts drove him into bankruptcy that same year, owing £132,000. One touching anecdote from the U.S. tour: a young child approached Pegler amid the Nevada desert and asked innocently if the engine could truly fly. Pegler, with a twinkle in his eye, replied, "In a way, yes. It flies along the tracks, carrying dreams and history with it." Despite the financial ruin, Pegler's efforts elevated the Flying Scotsman to global stardom, introducing it to new audiences and ensuring its story transcended British borders. A new savior emerged in 1973. Sir William McAlpine, a construction magnate, baronet, and fellow railway enthusiast, whose family firm had built much of Britain's infrastructure. Hearing that the Scotsman was stranded in the United States and facing seizure by creditors, McAlpine arranged to purchase it for $72,000, plus an additional $35,000 for shipping it back home via the Panama Canal. It arrived in Liverpool in February 1973, aboard a cargo ship, greeted by cheering crowds, and was steamed to Derby Works for a thorough overhaul. Under McAlpine's stewardship, the locomotive was meticulously maintained and ran extensively for 23 years, based initially at Steamtown in Carnforth and later at Southall Railway Centre. He took it on scenic tours across Britain, including the picturesque Settle and Carlisle line, with its soaring viaducts, dramatic tunnels, and sweeping moorland views, where it hauled heritage specials for enthusiasts. In 1984, it even hauled the royal train for the Queen Mother to North Woolwich, a prestigious honor that underscored its enduring royal connections. McAlpine's crowning achievement came in 1988 and 1989 when he did the unthinkable. He turned the Flying Scotsman loose in the Australian outback for the country's bicentennial celebrations. Shipped down under as part of the Steam 88 tour, the locomotive covered an astonishing 45,000 kilometers across the continent, becoming the first steam engine to circumnavigate the globe on its voyage to Australia and back via various routes. Modifications for the tour included a larger water tank and adaptations for Australian gauge tracks. On the 8th of August, 1989, in the dry vastness west of Sydney, the Flying Scotsman stretched out an epic 422-mile run without stopping from Parkes to Broken Hill, hauling 535 tons, a world record for non-stop steam locomotion that stands unbroken to this day, surpassing its own 1928 achievement. Later that year, it hauled a 735-ton train over 490 miles from Tarcoola to Alice Springs, another record. McAlpine later reunited it with another preserved locomotive, Pendennis Castle, for joint runs, creating memorable spectacles for fans. Anecdotes from the Australian tour abound. Locals in remote towns turned out in droves. Aboriginal communities shared stories around campfires near the tracks. And one fireman recalled battling dust storms that coated the cab in red earth, yet the engine performed flawlessly. By the 1990s, the Flying Scotsman had crossed oceans, continents, and charmed generations of railway enthusiasts worldwide. But the cumulative wear of nearly a century of operation began to show. Cracked frames, worn boilers, and fatigue in critical components. Pop star and rail buff Pete Waterman briefly owned a stake in 1993 through a partnership called Flying Scotsman Railways, campaigning for its continued operation and even producing a documentary, but financial pressures led to its sale. In 1996, businessman Tony Marchington, a doctor and entrepreneur, purchased the locomotive for £1.25 million, along with a set of Pullman coaches and the Southall depot. He invested another $1 million in a comprehensive overhaul from 1996 to 1999, installing a 250 pounds per square inch of 4 boiler from a sister class, converting the brakes from vacuum to air for modern safety standards, and restoring the apple green livery without smoke deflectors. The restoration was documented in a Channel 4 film, highlighting the skilled craftsmen who rebuilt it piece by piece. Its first post-overhaul mainline run on the 4th of July, 1999, from King's Cross to York, drew an estimated 1 million spectators along the route, a testament to its enduring popularity. Under Marchington, it hauled luxurious services like the Venice Simplon Orient Express from 2001 to 2004, evoking the golden age of travel with champagne dinners and scenic views. But escalating costs, including insurance and maintenance, combined with business losses of £474,619, led to bankruptcy in 2003. The locomotive was put up for auction, its future once again hanging in the balance. A dramatic final chapter in ownership unfolded in 2004 when the Scotsman's fate was again in jeopardy. Facing the possibility of export or dismantlement, the National Railway Museum in York launched a passionate Save Our Scotsman campaign, rallying public support and securing funding from diverse sources. Thanks to a £1.8 million grant from the National Heritage Memorial Fund, £350,000 in public donations matched by billionaire Richard Branson's Virgin Group, £70,000 from the Yorkshire Post newspaper, and additional contributions from sponsors like the Science Museum Group, the museum acquired the Flying Scotsman for £2.3 million at auction. It was declared one of the jewels in the crown of the national collection, ensuring it remained in public hands as a symbol of Britain's industrial heritage. The purchase included spare parts like an extra boiler and cylinders, as well as a support coach, providing a complete package for future maintenance. Under the care of the National Railway Museum, the locomotive faced its most extensive restoration yet, a project that would test the limits of preservation expertise. From 2006 to 2016, it lay disassembled in workshops, every part, from the massive boiler to the smallest bolt, inspected, repaired, or remade to exacting standards. The project was painstaking, initially budgeted at £2.5 million, but escalating to $4.2 million due to unforeseen issues like cracked cylinders, misaligned frames, and extensive corrosion hidden beneath layers of paint and grime. A public appeal. Save Our Scotsman 2 raised £250,000 in 2009, supplemented by grants from the Heritage Lottery Fund and sponsors like Riley & Son, who took over the tender work in 2013 after initial contractors faced delays. The restoration involved over 10,000 hours of labor, with engineers using modern techniques like ultrasonic testing, alongside traditional riveting and forging. Finally, in January 2016, her boiler returned to steam on the East Lancashire Railway for low-speed tests. And by October of that year, she emerged in the museum's Great Hall to cheers from crowds. Painted in British Railways Brunswick green as number 60,103, with the double chimney and smoke deflectors reinstated, she was clean, gleaming, and once more fully operational. Her mainline return on the 25th of February, 2016, from London King's Cross to York was a triumph, though briefly marred by over-enthusiastic trespassers on the tracks forcing an unscheduled stop. The oldest mainline steam locomotive in service was back, certified for 90 miles per hour and ready for excursions. However, preservation is never without challenges. In 1995, under McAlpine's ownership, it derailed on the Llangollen Railway during an empty stock move, with all wheels coming off the tracks due to a points failure and smoke issuing from a cracked boiler to cab joint, leading to a temporary withdrawal. More recently, on the 29th of September 2023, at Aviemore Station on the Strathspey Heritage Railway, a low-speed collision occurred while reversing to couple with the Belmond Royal Scotsman luxury tour train. The tender's gangway locked with a coach, causing minor damage and injuring 2 people, who were treated and discharged the same day. Repairs were swift, focusing on cosmetic fixes to the tender's paintwork, and the incident highlighted the ongoing risks of operating historic machinery. Today, as of October 27, 2025, the Flying Scotsman continues to tour British lines for enthusiasts and tourists alike, serving as a living monument to the golden age of steam. The National Railway Museum has announced its first trips for 2025, with details available on their events page, including excursions along heritage routes and special appearances. Even as diesel and electric power dominate the modern railways, her distinctive 3-cylinder beat and piercing whistle still turn heads and stir hearts wherever she goes. In fact, a global poll in 2015 named her the most famous locomotive in the world, a title reaffirmed in recent surveys. Countless people, from dedicated railway buffs poring over technical drawings to wide-eyed children experiencing their first steam ride, treasure the sight and sound of this enduring engine. At the National Railway Museum in York, she often sits proudly in the Great Hall or Station Hall as part of our shared heritage. But she also still moves under her own steam, certified for mainline operations until 2029 and heritage lines until 2032. Visitors can immerse themselves in her story through the Flying Scotsman VR experience, a virtual reality simulation that lets you ride the footplate or explore the workshops, and the ongoing exhibition Flying Scotsman, 100 Years, 100 Voices, which collects personal stories from those who've worked on or ridden her. The centenary celebrations in 2023 were a fitting tribute to her legacy. Special tours crisscrossed the country, from the East Coast Main Line to preserved railways like the Severn Valley and Bluebell. A commemorative 2-pound coin was issued by the Royal Mint, featuring the engine in colorized apple green livery. Royal Mail released a set of stamps depicting her in various eras, the last to bear Queen Elizabeth II's silhouette, and Britain's poet laureate Simon Armitage penned a poem titled A Poem in Motion, describing her as a streak of green and gold, a poem in steel and steam, bridging yesterday and tomorrow. For the first time, an all-female crew operated her on International Women's Day, breaking barriers and inspiring a new generation of engineers and enthusiasts. Though withdrawn briefly in April 2022 for another routine overhaul, she returned for the festivities in resplendent form. In 2024, bids were invited for a new custodian to manage her operations on behalf of the museum, ensuring professional handling while keeping her accessible to the public. Recent social media buzz, including posts from enthusiasts sharing videos of her steaming through Fife or discussions on her appearances in model train sets, underscores her timeless appeal. The cultural impact of the Flying Scotsman cannot be overstated. She has transcended the rails to become a fixture in popular media and imagination. In films, she starred in the 1929 feature The Flying Scotsman, where actual footage captured her in high-speed sequences of drama and pursuit. Disguised as a sister A3 class engine in the 1979 mystery Agatha, about Agatha Christie's disappearance, and departed from St. Pancras in the 2000 family comedy 102 Dalmatians. On television, she featured in a 1966 episode of the children's show Blue Peter, where presenter John Noakes declared her the most famous locomotive in the world. In a 1985 British Railways advert, racing against a modern inner-city 125 diesel in 2009's Top Gear, though a stand-in was used due to scheduling, and in documentaries like 2016's Flying Scotsman from the footplate on BBC4 following her restoration, and Flying Scotsman with Robson Green on ITV, where actor Robson Green joined engineers for hands-on insights. In children's literature, she visited the fictional island of Sodor in Reverend W. Audrey's The Railway series book Enterprising Engines, inspiring episodes of Thomas and Friends where her tenders appeared in tender engines due to budget constraints, and she starred in the CGI film Thomas and Friends. The Great Race in 2016, voiced by Rufus Jones with a Scottish accent. Beyond screens, her influence extends to music, with a 1972 LP titled Flying Scotsman and Other Steam Locomotives in Action, capturing her distinctive sounds for audiophiles, to video games like Microsoft Train Simulator in 2001, where players could drive her on virtual routes, Train Sim World 4 in 2023 with high-fidelity models, and even Forza Horizon 4 in 2018 as a drivable showcase vehicle, and to collectibles, with Hornby Railways using her image for their centenary logo, and producing countless scale models in 000 and N gauges. Coins have honored her enduring legacy, from a 2012 London Olympics £5 piece depicting her in motion to the 2023 centenary £2 with intricate detailing. Anecdotes continue to surface. In 2018, Alan Pegler's ashes were scattered in her firebox during a farewell run, fulfilling his lifelong bond. Sir William McAlpine once described her as a national treasure that must be preserved for future generations, not just as a machine, but as a piece of our soul. Recent X posts, as of 2025, show enthusiasts sharing clips of her in Scotland, discussions on her role in LEGO sets like the Kobe Flying Scotsman, and announcements of her appearances at events like the Greatest Gathering in Derby, where she joined over 50 historic vehicles to celebrate 200 years of railways. The story of the Flying Scotsman is far more than a mere list of dates, records, and mechanical specifications. It is a profoundly human story of visionary engineers like Sir Nigel Gresley, who pressed forward the limits of speed and innovation in an age of uncertainty, of dedicated crews like Sparshat and Webster, who braved heat, war, and exhaustion to keep her running true, of entrepreneurs like Pegler, McAlpine, and Marchington, who rescued a vanishing past from the scrap heap against all odds, and of ordinary people who lined the tracks, generation after generation, to cheer on this piece of living history. Through 2 world wars that tested her resilience, glittering exhibitions that showcased her beauty, transatlantic and Australian tours that spread her fame, and lonely workshop repairs that revived her spirit, this locomotive has carried something far more than passengers or freight. It has carried the aspirations, the identity, and the unyielding spirit of its age. As long as we remember it, through museums, media, and memories, the Flying Scotsman connects us to a time when technology seemed infused with magic, when the hiss of steam and the clatter of wheels promised adventure, progress, and unity. In the end, its legacy reminds us that to fly, whether by iron horse, jet plane, or any other machine, is to reach for our highest human horizons, bridging the past with the future in an eternal journey along the rails of time.